It's where I breathe, it's where I feel every moment going by. It's where I've come to feel the sun and the freedom of this endless open sky. And I'm here, yeah, and I'm right here, yeah. It's where the dream, it's where the dream has got some hope of coming true. I take a chance and join the dash and feel there's nothing out there that I couldn't do. And I'm here, yeah, and I'm right here, yeah.
So I want to start today by telling you a little bit about my last 8 months. I want to start today by telling you a little bit about the last time I was speaking in Ontario, which is almost a little over 8 months ago. I was speaking at the University of Toronto in the Mars Discovery District in downtown Toronto, and while I was doing that, this is what was happening at home. The flooding last summer in southern Alberta, the Insurance Bureau of Canada calls it the costliest natural disaster in Canadian history. The total cost of the floods in southern Alberta is estimated to be somewhere between $5 and $6 billion. That's an unfathomably large number. And to put it into context for you, we have an LRT system in Calgary, one of the most successful light rail transit systems anywhere in the world. And if we spent that $6 billion that we're going to be spending on flood recovery on the LRT system, we would double the light rail transit in Calgary. Flood cleanup will be by far the largest public works project in the history of Alberta. But that's actually not why I want to talk to you about the flood today. There's a couple things I'd like you to notice here. This is the community of Bowness, the south bank of the Elbow River. Where you see water channels, well, those used to be roads. Where you see patches of trees between those water channels, well, those are people's houses. I took this picture. As I came back from Toronto that day, I was in a helicopter, and I took this photo. And the reason that I wanted to show you this photo in particular is I'd like you to, oops, that's gone too far. I'd like you to look at the north bank of the Bow River. At the bottom of your screen, the community of Montgomery. The streets are dry. The basements didn't get any damage. That's nature. That's the world we live in. That's the capriciousness that we abide by even in a sophisticated country like this. The anger of the river could have hit anybody. In fact, there are two rivers that run through Calgary, the Bow and the Elbow. I know that's funny. This is the Bow River. On a summer's day, the Bow River will run at 100 to 200, sometimes 300 cubic meters per second. You're seeing it at nearly 1,500 cubic meters per second. The Elbow River is more placid. It runs through downtown Calgary. On a summer's day, it usually will run at 30 to 40 cubic meters per second. That night, the night I took this picture, it peaked upstream of Calgary, normally 30 to 40. It peaked at 1,200. So you get a sense of what we were facing, and this kind of image is something that you saw all over Calgary. It's a bunch of trash, a bunch of rubbish out in front of somebody's house. But I want you to think about that trash for a minute. That's photo albums. That's your kid's artwork from kindergarten. That's that couch that you saw in a catalog and you scrimped and saved because you had to have that exact couch in your living room. That trash sitting out there for all to see on the street, waiting for my colleagues who drive garbage trucks to come by and haul it away. That trash is people's lives. And when we have an incident like this, that's what we have to remember. That this is a blow to the heart of our community because it impacts people's lives. But we learned two things in Calgary over the last 8 months. Two incredibly important things. I'll mention the first one quickly because I want to spend most of our time talking about the second one. The first one is just how incredibly blessed we are. As Canadians, as Albertans, as Calgarians, how incredibly blessed we are to live in a place where government works. To live in a place where public servants go to work every single day to keep us safe. And over the last 8 months, we have seen extraordinary work from our public servants. The federal government certainly, and in particular the members of the Canadian Armed Forces who bravely saved neighborhoods that from pure inundation, mostly reservists, by the way. Incredible work from our provincial government and the people who work in healthcare. But in particular, I got 20,000 colleagues in the city of Calgary. They go to work every single day. They drive buses, they fix roads, they program IT infrastructure, they look after the less fortunate in our city. When there's a crisis, they're the first ones on the scene in their police cars and fire trucks. And one thing that all Calgarians will agree with me over the last 8 months, by the way, God bless the garbage men, who work every single day to bring a little bit of cleanliness and a little bit of normalcy to our streets and to our communities. I've always been very proud of my 20,000 colleagues in the city of Calgary, but I have never been more proud of them than I have over the last 8 months, proving once and for all how important it is and how grateful we all should be that we live in a place where government works. But I actually don't want to talk much about my colleagues and about public servants today, and I know that none of my colleagues in public service would begrudge me for this. Our jobs are made so much easier by the extraordinary quality of the public whom we serve. So I want to tell you a story. I tell lots of stories. That's why I can never keep my speeches to the time that I'm supposed to keep them to. The waters peaked on Thursday night and Friday morning. By Saturday and Sunday, they were already starting to recede. We were very lucky, and we were starting to see the devastation that they left behind. And we started to see everyday people, men and women, really start to ask, how can I help? What can I do? So I said to my colleagues at the City of Calgary, you know, we've got to figure out a way to manage the volunteer response here, because there is going to be an extraordinary volunteer response. And I asked that a team be put into the Emergency Operations Center to look after what we were going to do with volunteers. And my colleagues at the city, God bless them, sometimes can get themselves in circles. And they were a bit freaked out by this. You know, we don't really know how to handle volunteers. What if somebody gets tetanus? What if somebody falls? How are we going to manage the legal liability? And they just could not get their heads around what to do. I have a very small political staff, a very small office, and I actually took one of the people from my office and I assigned them to that group. I said, you got to go babysit these folks, Nancy. Help them figure out what it is they're doing. And she did. She tried. She was getting very frustrated. On Sunday night, in the wee hours of the morning, I needed to get some sleep. I went home. And when I woke up the next morning, my alarm went off at 7 a.m., and I heard on the radio that the City of Calgary is inviting anyone who would like to volunteer with flood recovery to meet at McMahon Stadium at 9 a.m., just 2 hours later. And I was a bit shocked to hear this, because that decision hadn't been made when I had left the emergency ops center a few hours before. So I phoned in and said, what is going on? And they said, well, Mayor, we decided we'd better get started. So we're just going to hope for the best and ask people to come to the stadium. And I said, well, you're being a bit ridiculous. You've only given them 2 hours notice. On a Monday, who is possibly going to be able to come? And they said, well, sir, that's sort of on purpose. We don't really want that many people to come because we don't know what we're doing. So we figure if a couple hundred people show up today, maybe 200 or 300 people, then we'll know what to do with them, and then we'll be ready to have a much bigger onslaught of people tomorrow. And I said, bureaucrat logic always confuses me, but okay. And I said, I think you're being crazy. I don't think anybody's going to come. I think 30 or 40 people will show up. It's going to be a little bit embarrassing. But I suppose I better go over there and say thank you to the volunteers and the people who wanted to come. And this is what I saw when I got there. Thousands and thousands of people, young and old, some of them in coveralls and work boots, some of them in tank tops and flip-flops, ready to help their neighbors, ready to help people that they didn't even know. There wasn't a PA system. We weren't expecting that many people. And when I got there, one of my colleagues was standing on a milk crate trying to talk to this huge crowd. And I remembered something. And what I remembered is that the fire chief had loaned me a vehicle with lights and sirens so that I could get around the city and into the evacuated zones. By the way, he has never actually asked for it back. Which on the one hand makes me question the efficiency of our fleet practices, but on the other hand I have lights and sirens, which I am not allowed to touch, just so you know. Boy, I want to though. Anyway, it sits in my parking spot at City Hall and I just look at it and go, I'm getting late, could I just take that car? The lights and the siren? No. Anyway. I realized that if it had lights and sirens, it probably had that voice of God that you never want if you're driving down the street. Pull over now. So I climbed up on the hood of the truck and I reached into the driver's side window and took out the little microphone and talked to the people. And meanwhile, my colleague standing under me looked up at me and said, Mayor, we've run out of forms. We don't have any more space on the buses. Send these people home. Tell them to come back tomorrow. How was I going to do that? So I stood there on the hood of that truck and I said, you know what? We've run out of forms. Actually, you can see, I just noticed this now. That guy's got the form. He got one of the last forms. And I said, we've run out of forms. There's no more room on the buses. But you know what? You know what neighborhoods have been badly affected. Just go. Just go. Don't worry about anyone asking you what to do. You'll know what to do when you get there. You'll see people who need help. Just go help. And from then we saw the most extraordinary deployment of humanity I've ever seen. Tens of thousands of people working hard every day as volunteers just to try and bring a bit of normalcy back to people they have never met. Hard work. Back-breaking work, dirty work, and they just did it. These people have no idea whose house that is they're posing in front of. It was probably the 5th or 6th house that they had done over the course of those few days. They'd all taken the time off work and off school in order to do this. They are filthy. That was not pleasant mountain spring water that they were hauling out of people's basements. They learned more about cleaning out drywall than they ever thought they would ever know. They didn't smell very good. One funny thing about floods, they disturb dormant mosquito eggs. Did you know that? Mosquitoes can lay eggs that can lay dormant for decades. As soon as they get wet, they hatch. So these people are covered in mosquito bites from the biggest mosquitoes you've ever seen in your lives. Luckily, that only lasted a week. But the reason I wanted to show you this picture, actually, is I wanted to point out that they're eating hamburgers. Sounds like a funny thing to point out. The reason I point that out is because everyone in our community figured out how they could help. Not everyone could do that back-breaking labor and rip out that sodden drywall and haul it out in wheelbarrows. We had an explosion in the community of lemonade stands. You couldn't go 2 blocks without seeing kids set up on their front lawn selling lemonade for flood relief in neighborhoods that never even saw a drop of water. And of course, you had people bringing food. There's a woman I remember as Sam's mom. She does have a name and a profession. She's a lawyer. But at that time, she was thinking of herself as Sam's mom. And she told me, you know, Mayor, in my house, I don't have anything. I don't have a fridge. I don't have a stove. I don't have cupboards. I have no way of preparing meals for my family. But Mayor, tonight for dinner, we had hot shepherd's pie. And in fact, we've had hot meals for dinner all this week because of our neighbors. And that's what I think about when I think about community, when I think about who we are as a community. On that first slide, I showed you the neighborhood of Bowness. The first road in Bowness, the one you couldn't even see on that peninsula, is called Bow Crescent. And a couple weeks later, I went and walked Bow Crescent, understanding the nature of the damage. And I met a couple who were back in their house, but there was nothing else in their house. Nothing else there. Just stripped to the studs. They were sleeping in hammocks. It was like camping indoors. They had found a piece of plywood in their basement, and they scrawled a message on that piece of plywood, and they nailed it to the tree out front of their house. And if I remember nothing else about the greatest natural disaster to face Canada in our history, this is what I'll remember. So now, it keeps doing that. So now, the question we ask ourselves, I used to be a university professor. In fact, my university is forever reminding me that I'm still a university professor. I'm just on leave. I'm supposed to be back January 1st, 2018. If I were still a professor of nonprofit management, I'd probably spend the next 10 years of my life thinking about this issue. How do we take that humanity, that resilience, that power, that ability to make the community better that comes out at times of crisis? And how do we take that power and apply it to poverty, to homelessness, to environmental degradation, to all the myriad of issues that we face every single day? How do we build and maintain that level of community? And that's really what I want to spend time with you talking about today. I'm not going to talk too much longer. I'm speaking in allegory today, the allegory of the flood, I suppose. But I do want to, why does it keep doing that? I do want to talk a little bit more about the sense of community, and I've certainly been very impressed since I've been here this morning at how many people there are here and how all of you in so many different ways are engaging in the very best of citizenship, in the very best of what community is. And now we have to think about, how do we harness that power? How do we harness that power of humanity into building a better community here, right here in London? How do we do that? Some years ago, long before I was a politician, I was engaged as a volunteer, as a citizen volunteer, in a process called Imagine Calgary. And the idea of Imagine Calgary was to develop a 100-year vision for the city of Calgary. Sounds like something you guys are doing here in London right now, doesn't it? We managed to get 18,000 Calgarians, and that was before Twitter, involved in capturing that shared vision and transforming that into our municipal plans, into how we're working going forward. And in fact, the single number one question we ask at City Council whenever we have to make a decision is, Is this aligned with our Imagine Calgary vision? The vision that those Calgarians wrote, a vision of a city that is a great place to make a living and a great place to make a life. A city that is defined by its energy and a city that is defined by its connectedness. A city that is defined by ensuring that every single person in the community has the opportunity right here, right now, to live a great Canadian life. And every single decision that we make at City Council is focused on that question. Are we aligned with that vision? How does this move us along the road to that vision? In 2010, for various reasons, I decided to throw my hat into the political ring. I still don't think of myself as a politician. I always have to remind myself, shake the hands, kiss the babies, never get that backwards. But Saturday afternoon, they're a little slow. I'm the wonk, I'm the nerd. I'm the one who comes up with the ideas. How in the world did I end up in this job? I don't know. As I always say to people, I still don't know how to be a politician. If I had two faces, you think I'd lead with this one? But there was a real desire and a need in Calgary to see change happen. I usually don't tell this part of the story, but I have a sense that you'll understand it in this room. People always say, what is the secret of your electoral success? Your opponents were much better known than you were. You were running against existing politicians, community leaders, corporate CEO, the anchor of the 6 o'clock news. Your main opponent spent 3 times as much as you did in that election. What was the secret? And I'll tell you there were 3 things. The first, as I say, I never talk about this, but I feel like I should here. My instinct is telling me to do it. The first is that it was clear that the community was ready. That the community was ready for a change. When you think about Alberta politics, the word dynamic is probably not the first word that comes to mind. We've had the same provincial government for 43 years. I always remember how long the provincial government has been in place because they were elected 1 year before I was born, so I take my age and add a year. And so it's the only provincial government I've ever known. And certainly we have very, very slow changes when that happens in Alberta. And so for a long time when I was growing up, when I was going to university, it was sort of like dissent was not welcomed. That debate and discussion were just not part of what we did. When I came back to Calgary in the early part of the 2000s, something felt very different. People were willing, it was like the ice had broken in the spring. People were willing to have conversations and disagree with one another once in a while about their hopes and dreams and fears and challenges for our community and what we were trying to build together. And so I felt like we were ready, that we were ready to have that bigger, broader conversation about who we are as a community. You know, we have not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 competing TEDx organizations in Calgary that put on these lectures. You have to write an essay saying why you should be allowed to go and watch the lectures because they all sell out. And all over the city, I felt like people were having these conversations and all they needed was a little push, a little catalyst from the political process to translate those conversations into political conversations. I started every single speech in 2010 with the sentence, I'm here to tell you that government matters, that politics matters, that the people whom we elect matter. And let's start having those conversations about what we can do at the political level in order to make change. That was number 1. The city was ready. Very quickly, number 2 and number 3. Number 2, as you've learned over the last 20 minutes, believe it or not, I've already been up here for 23 minutes, according to my fancy timer. I know it feels like 3 hours. As you learned in the last 20 minutes, I am completely incapable of speaking in short sentences. It takes me 3 minutes to say my name. So I don't know how to talk in sound bites. I've never learned how to do it. So politics in full sentences. Or if you prefer, don't treat citizens like idiots. Assume that people are smart enough to understand nuance that they're smart enough to understand complexity, and that they're smart enough to really engage in conversations about the future of their community. Everybody's got a stake in the future of their community. Nobody's apathetic. I've never met anybody who doesn't care about the future, about the community, about their family. The problem is the language we use and the frames in which we communicate with folks are alienating. We speak inside baseball language. Look at the election going on in Toronto at the moment. You read the analysis and all you hear is, oh, there's these many candidates on the center left and on the center right, and there's no one going up the middle, and there's no one on the far left. Who cares? Nobody understands this stuff. If you were going to go walk out into the arena at a London Knights game and survey 100 people and ask them, are you left-wing or right-wing, 85 of them would have no idea what you were talking about. 11 of them would answer you and get it wrong. In Toronto, I said the next line, and the remaining 4 are John Tory. I actually have no idea what that means, but everybody laughed. The remaining 4 are probably people in this room. And so we have to be able to break out of that. Is getting the snow off the roads a liberal or a conservative idea? Is filling the potholes left-wing or right-wing? Is making sure that we've got clean water every second, every minute of the day a socialist or a libertarian ideal? None of these things are true. And we have to be able to talk to people in the terms that they understand. So that's number 2. Number 3, go to people where they live. Don't expect them to come to you. So I didn't have any money when I was running that political campaign. What I had was a lot of volunteers and a lot of time. And so over the course of that summer, traditionally considered the dead season in municipal politics, nobody's paying attention to politics, I went every single place I could think where people were gathering together with their neighbors in community, where they were living and breathing the same air as their neighbors, actively participating in community. That meant I hung out on the river pathways. I went to festivals and parks, shopping malls, and just talked to people and encouraged them to continue to talk to other people about their future. And now, in this job, that is what we continue to do. We do most of our public engagement. We don't have open houses anymore because nobody ever comes to them. And by the way, if you ever have an open house without childcare, you haven't really had an open house. And so we go to shopping malls. We talk to people. My favorite thing is we developed a new 30-year plan for Calgary Transit this year, and one of our best engagement tools was this. You'll be standing at the bus, at the stop, waiting for your bus, and a very fancy bus decorated with Post-it notes all over it would come up. And guess what? If you were lucky enough to have that bus come down your route, you got a free ride that day. But in return for your free ride, you had to talk to the senior managers of Calgary Transit who were on the bus about your experiences with transit and how to make transit better. Because as I always say, the real experts in our communities are the people who live in our communities. Everyone is an expert in their own life. Take transit for an example. I love transit. I'm a transit nut. I love buses and trains, and I love to take public transit from the airport and the train station in different cities and see how it works and how it could be better. And I've got a lot of colleagues who work in transit who know a lot about transit. I've got network engineers and fare optimization specialists, and I've got people who know how to drive buses and who know how to drive trains, but none of us are the experts in transit. The expert in transit, of course, you know who it is. It's the person who takes the bus every day. She can tell you how the system works and how it could be better. And that's what we have to embed deeply in our DNA as political leaders to try and understand that. I'm going to wrap up, even though I've got a lot more things to talk about. Only 6 more pages. My poor communications guy, he tries, he writes notes, I ignore them. Someday I'll actually read them. I'm going to tell you 2 more very quick things, and then we'll have a little bit of time for dialogue. Hopefully Sean won't beat me up for going over time. 2 more quick things. One, just because I want to pitch it. Shortly after I was elected, I pulled in a group of super volunteers, just like everyone in this room, a small group of 10 people, and I said, guys, you've got an important job. You've got a 30-day deadline. And in 30 days, I want you to figure out how to get more people involved in the community. I want you to figure out how to take that level of energy we saw during the election and sustain it between elections. So imagine, any one of you could have been tapped for that group to figure that out. And I gave them that 30-day deadline because I wanted them to get it done. 45 days later, they came back. And they said, Mayor, good news. We've come up with a name for the committee. By the way, they could not have done worse. The Mayor's Committee on Civic Engagement. And I've told them so many times, I've told this story so many times of how they came up with a bad name that they kind of got offended. And so they came, this is true. They came to me a month ago and said, Mayor, you've told the story so many times about how we couldn't have done it worse on picking the name for the committee. We've changed the name of the committee. And I said, what is it now? And they said, the Mayor's Civic Engagement Committee. It's shorter, snappier. Anyway, bless their hearts. Sometime after that, and now they're fighting over whether it should be the Mayor's Civic Engagement Committee or Council Civic Engagement Committee. I said, you don't want that. Sometime after that, they came to me with an idea, a very simple idea. And usually, actually, today I'm wearing a Emerging Leaders pin, but I'm usually wearing a pin on my lapel that just has a big number 3 on it. And that idea was, and it's totally open source, and I encourage you to steal it for London. In fact, I'd like you to. It's called 3 Things for Calgary. And it's a very simple thing. It's a movement where we reach out and ask every citizen in our community to do 3 things for their community every year. Simple as that. And when they pitched this idea to me, I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. And I said, folks, you've managed to violate the rules of mathematics because you've created something that is simultaneously too simple and too complicated. It's too simple because we're not giving people ideas on what they can do. You know, I'm an academic. I study nonprofit management. I know that the number one reason people don't volunteer is because nobody asked me to. So we actually have to give them resources and links and tell them different ways that they can get involved, or they won't be able to take that step. And it's too complicated because you're asking people to do 3 things. You need to have a low barrier to entry. Ask them to do only 1 thing so that they can get started. And I was convinced, and I was wrong, because I was convinced that those 2 elements were precisely why the program would be successful. Because we're not telling people what to do, but we're simply setting the expectation that you should do something, people figure it out. Whether it's shoveling my neighbor's walk, joining my local community association, running for politics, people figure out, what am I passionate about? What do I have the ability with my own hands to do? And of course, it's not really about 3 things. It's about creating a lifetime habit of service. And whenever I talk to people who are hyper-engaged, like the people in this room, I always tell them about the top secret 4th thing. It's not going to stay top secret so long because I keep talking about it. But the top secret 4th thing is that once you complete your 3 things, and I know all of you in the room are like, dude, it's March. I've already done 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 things for this community this year. Well, once you finish your 3 things, or your 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 things, talk about it. Don't be shy. Share the stories of your service and what difference it's making for the community. More important, share the story of how your service brings you joy. Inspire others. Mentor others. Convince 3 other people to do 3 things for the community. And together we build acts of community building, large and small. And our cities together after that will never ever be the same. I want to tell you one last thing. This is personal. But because Glenn Pearson introduced me, and I know that this topic is close to his heart as well, I want to talk to you a little bit about this. Why are we successful in this country? Is it because we've got wood or water? Is it because we have carbon molecules locked deep in the ground in northern Alberta? All of those things matter. And I'll tell you why this country is successful. I'll tell you why we're a beacon of hope for the world. And the reason this country is so successful is because we have learned one simple thing. The simple truth that has evaded so many in this broken world. And that simple truth is this. We're all in it together. Our neighbor's pain is our pain. Our neighbor's success is our success. Every single one of us, regardless of what we look like, or where we came from, or how we worship, or how much money we have, or whom we love. Every single one of us deserves the right here, right now, to live a great Canadian life. We figured that out. We figured that out together as a community, and that is the promise of our community and what we need to fight for every single day. Did I say I like to tell stories? I'm going to end with one. I had the opportunity a little while ago to go to the 100th birthday of an elementary school in downtown Calgary. It's called Connaught School. It's named after the Duke of Connaught, the son of Queen Victoria, the Governor-General of Canada, who came to open the first Calgary Stampede in 1912. And they named the school after him. Connaught School is in the heart of downtown Calgary. It's often the first place where people stop when they're new to our country. And I went to that 100th anniversary in that impossibly small gym and looked out at those kids, all wearing their matching t-shirts, celebrating the 100th birthday of their school. 240 of them. They were from 61 different countries. They spoke 42 different languages at home. And they were all wearing those matching t-shirts. And I looked beyond them and I looked at their parents, wearing hijab and kanga cloth, sitting at the back, looking, truth be told, a little bit nervous. And I talked to those kids and I talked to their parents that day, and I heard horrible things. I heard stories of war, of degradation, of poverty, of violence so horrific you can't imagine one human being doing it to another, let alone in front of a child. The only thing those kids had in common was that they came to this country with absolutely nothing. The lucky ones had their parents, the unlucky ones didn't even have that. And it would have been so easy that day. It would have been so easy to feel a sense of despair, to lose all hope. To lose all hope for humanity and for this broken world we live in. But for some reason I didn't that day. I had one of those moments where suddenly everything is clear. I understood one thing at that moment with undeniable truth. And that was that whatever had happened to these kids, whatever had happened to their families, whatever wrath some vengeful God had rained down upon them, they had one extraordinary stroke of luck. And that extraordinary stroke of luck was that they ended up here. They ended up in Canada, they ended up in Alberta, they ended up in Calgary, they ended up at Connaught School. They ended up in a community that was going to look after them, that had a stake in their success, a community that would catch them if they stumbled. And I knew at that moment, standing there in that school gym, that those kids were going to be all right. And that every one of them would have the chance, right here, right now, to live that great Canadian life. I'm very lucky. I get to go to work every single day and try and fulfill that promise of our community. And I hope that every single one of you out of today will recommit yourself to fulfilling that promise of our community, ensuring that every single one of us right here, right now, has that chance to live that great Canadian life. It's in our power. Thank you all.